YouTube, welcome back to another video. When it comes to prepping, it's easy to get overwhelmed, especially when you're first starting out. One of the most frequently asked questions is usually along the lines of, how do I get started with prepping and what are the essentials that I need? In this video, I'm going to talk about the basics of what you need to do now, what items you should acquire immediately, and much more. I'll talk about how much of everything you should have, but only after I explain the basics, so stick around for that. And if you're interested in some of the products that I use personally, check out some of the links in the description. Now, before you start researching land near you and trying to calculate the supplies and money you'd need to make a fortress stocked to the brim, let's just stop for a second and breathe. The world as we know it isn't likely going anywhere, at least not anytime soon. Unless you happen to be watching this video when the world is falling apart, in which case you probably would have wished that you watched this a little bit sooner. But it's never really too late to start. So let's say the world isn't ending tomorrow. What are the first things that you should do today as a brand new prepper? There's a wide range of things that you need to know to be prepared, and luckily for you, we're going to cover everything you need to survive. Now, this is just a general overview video, but there's a lot to take in here, and we're going to touch on a few things like what you should buy, whether you should bug in or bug out, how to maintain and store your preps properly, and how much of everything you need. If you think prepping is something new, then you're sorely mistaken. For generations, we've had different types of things that our families would do to help protect them from future events. In fact, I would be willing to say that pretty much every person in the world is a prepper in some way. Now, before I start a war in the comments, let me explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. Your goal as a human being is to survive. Your goal as a prepper is to survive. The only difference is the scenario that you are trying to survive. This could be as simple as storing a couple extra blankets if you live in a cold area that's prone to power outages, or it could be as complex as having your own underground bunker stocked with rations and munitions in case of a nuclear attack. But prepping could be as simple as getting up every morning, putting on your work clothes, and heading to work. How is going to work prepping, you might ask? You go to work to earn money. Money that you need to pay your bills, buy food, drinks, and just live your life. Unfortunately, it is sad that we live in a world where you can't really live without money, so we need to do things to protect ourselves from not having money in the future by working today. An even more basic concept would be, why do you open your eyes? Why don't you just walk around with your eyes closed? Because you might fall off a cliff, you might walk into something and hurt yourself, you might get hit by a car. So basically you have your eyes open to prepare for things that could potentially hurt you. So on a tiny little level like that, yes, I think everybody is a prepper, at least a little bit. But enough about that, let's get into some of the basics. First and foremost, the biggest thing that most preppers fail to consider is quite literally probably the most basic of all things, being in good shape. You may have watched some movies where some hero goes around defeating wave after wave of enemies against all odds and overwhelming force to emerge the victor. Well, that's just Hollywood garbage and isn't likely ever going to happen. But what can happen is something that could require you to have to travel long distances, possibly even by foot. Let's say you find yourself traveling on a road, you don't have cell reception, and you run out of gas. You know you passed the gas station a few miles back, so you need to walk there, grab a gas can, and head back. Or maybe something happened like the events of 9/11 where there was mass chaos and panic, and you had to get away from a scene as fast as you can. Imagine being close to a huge disaster such as that and needing to get away. It may not be possible to get into your car or bike, you might just have to pick up and run. Being out of shape could quite literally cost you your life in a situation like that if you're not able to get away from something like that quick enough. Another reason why this is the first thing I mention when it comes to new preppers is because it goes above and beyond being able to just carry gear in a bug out bag or get through a tough disaster. If something does happen in today's society that changes life as we know it, being healthy can really increase your odds of survival. You'll require less food to stay alive compared to someone who is heavier set, you're less likely to suffer major health problems, and you can get more tasks done easier in a day. Now, that may not always be true, but in most cases it is. However, I do know this is a tough subject, and it's actually tough for a lot of people. After a long day of work, it's easy to come home and just crash on the couch, but getting healthy is free for the most part, and is one of the simplest ways you can prepare for the future. Now, enough talk about exercise, let's talk about some of the basic preps you need to survive. Over the years, we've all gotten quite comfortable with life as we know it. If you're a teenager, then losing the internet might possibly be the worst thing ever. If you're a smoker or a drinker and you haven't had your fix today, that could be equally as bad. Some people stock up on months of cigarettes, alcohol, multiple phone battery chargers, and more. But all those are creature comforts and not necessarily things you need to live. So let's go into those basics. The most basic thing that you need to survive is air. You literally may be able to only go a few seconds without air before you start having major problems. Now, I'm not talking about stocking up on bottles of air in case the world's air supply suddenly disappears, but I'm talking more about the ability to breathe. For example, if you live in an area that's prone to wildfires or risks of fire in general, it may be a good idea to stock up on some type of a mask that can filter out harmful smoke, even if it's just for a short time to get away from that area. Many people that die in fires do so due to asphyxiation due to inhaling too much smoke. So if this is something you're worried about, it's definitely going to pay to think ahead. Again, I don't think you should just rush out and buy little tiny scuba tanks of emergency air, but I'm not saying that those would be a complete waste of money either. I think there are some scenarios where something like that could come in very handy. For example, if you live on a boat. Imagine in the middle of the night, all of a sudden you feel your bed get soaked with water and your entire boat is now sinking. You probably only have a few seconds to try to grab everything you can and get out of the boat before you're sucked under and live in a watery grave. But again, that's kind of a limited scenario, so I'm not advocating to do that, but air is one of those things. Without it, you'll die very shortly. The next thing that is the second most important thing for you to consider when you're starting off prepping is water. Because honestly, after a few days without drinking, you're very likely going to die. Water is the main source of life as we know it, and we often take it for granted how lucky we are to have access to it. There are multiple guides and websites on the internet that tell you how much water you need per day, but again, that only pertains to drinking water, and it doesn't apply to everyone equally. If you're used to sitting in an air-conditioned building all day long and you sit at a desk and don't really do much exercise, odds are you'd have to use a lot more water if you suddenly had to be somewhere that's warmer and if you had to do any type of manual labor, especially during the heat of the day. So while you normally survive on just a few glasses of water a day, increased heat and exertion will also increase the amount of water you need. So you need to consider this when you're trying to figure out how much water to get. This is the reason so many people get sick and die from heat stroke, because they think, oh, well, I've had enough water for today, but not realizing that their body's using up a lot more. Now, besides just having water to drink to sustain your life, you're also going to need water for basic tasks. Washing your hands, cooking food, cleaning the dishes, flushing your toilets, showering or bathing, watering your garden, and so many more uses. When someone talks about how much water you need, you have to think beyond just what you need to physically survive, but also to keep your creature comforts, like flushing a toilet, able to keep happening. Sure, you could go a few days or maybe a week without showering, but it's going to smell pretty ripe, especially if you live in a hotter climate. So it's definitely something you want to consider. The easiest way to stock up on water is to do it during the good times. If you wait for a big storm or hurricane to come through, odds are you either won't be able to find any, or there's going to be such a limited amount that you're going to be limited on what you can actually buy. However, bottled water on its own can be very expensive and is kind of hard to store because of the awkward shape of the bottles. That's why so many people choose to use water storage tanks that are made to be stacked or stored on shelves for long periods of time. These can range from anywhere from a few gallons to 55-gallon drums to hundreds or thousands of gallons in the tank. Now, you don't always need to save that much water, especially if you have access to a stream or a pond or something that gives you some running water, which kind of brings up the next part of this topic, which is water filtration. Just because you have access to water doesn't mean it's safe to drink. And in fact, it'd be very rare to find clean, potable water in nature. So you need to think ahead. If your water is murky or tainted, you will need to keep something like a life straw or a Berkey water filter to purify it. However, you need to keep in mind that these filters only remove some of the pathogens, microorganisms, and other harmful bacteria, as well as some trace elements. But it doesn't filter out things like harmful chemicals, radiation, or other things that could potentially kill you. That's why you need to know where your water comes from and what might be in it before you just go ahead and drink it. Just because it looks clean and clear doesn't mean that it's not harmful. So try to stock up on drinkable water and use things like that for cleaning and sanitation unless absolutely necessary. Remember, how much water you need is something you have to figure out based on your needs. It'll take some time to calculate exactly what you want, and always add in a 30 or 40% overage. Why? Because again, you end up using more water in stressful situations, or maybe one of your water supplies goes bad. So having backups is definitely the way to go. Or perhaps you decide that, hey, now's a great time to start a garden. Well, gardens need water, and unless you're in an area that gets regular rainfall, that could be something else you have to think of to prepare for. Now that kind of brings me to the next topic, which is food. Food happens to be the third thing on my list, primarily because without it, you just can't perform. Food's a great prep item because if you lose your job, at least you know you can feed your family while you find other work. While it is technically possible to go a few weeks without food, it's highly unrealistic because your body just will not have the energy it needs to do the basic tasks. Sure, you'll be alive for those few weeks, but you likely won't be able to do anything during that period. After a few days, you'll start to slow down and lose more and more energy, and without being able to bring anything into you, the more you exert yourself, the faster you're going to use up your food stores. Some people think that overweight people will have an advantage here because they have so much stored up fat, but unfortunately it's the opposite. Your body gets used to consuming the regular amounts of food that you eat, which means those who regularly consume more food require more food to maintain themselves. So keep that in mind when you're deciding how much food you want to stock up on. We'll talk more about calories and stuff later. Speaking of stocking up on food, remember to do so with things that you like. So many people hear how easy it is to stock up on rice and beans and sugar and flour and salt and lots of other shelf-stable items, but at the end of the day, those items are only as good as what you can make with them. While there's nothing wrong with those items in general, if you're not used to eating them, then you could be doing more harm than good. I always recommend purchasing things that you like and you know what you will eat. Just because something lasts for a long time doesn't mean that you'll be able to stomach it when the time comes. Sure, you might think you're going to be able to make a bunch of bread with all that flour, but hey, maybe you forgot to bring yeast or sugar or salt or other ingredients that you need to make those into meals. So always try things first before you go crazy, and don't forget to have a variety. While it's rarely talked about today because we have access to such a large variety of food, having only a few variations of food in your diet may not be enough to keep you alive. Sure, you can store up all the calories you need, but if your food is deficient in key nutrients and vitamins, you could develop severe deficiencies over time that could lead to disease or death. So make sure to vary your goods, pick up things you like, and don't be afraid to try new things. While it would be great to stock up on fully prepared freeze-dried meals and MREs, they're very costly and they do take up a lot of space. Canned goods can be just as good, and just because they have a best buy date doesn't mean that they are bad. In fact, most canned foods won't really ever go bad if stored properly, but instead may just lose some of their nutritional value or consistency. Also, this is a great place to talk about gardens, mainly because so many people think that all they have to do is stockpile a bunch of seeds, more commonly known as seed vaults, but they never actually take the time to grow anything. Gardening and actually being able to bring in a large harvest takes time, trial and error, as well as knowledge of where to grow and when to grow. So before assuming you can just magically grow a green thumb overnight, I'd strongly recommend trying this out. Many people don't realize how many nutrients and what type of soil you really need to have for certain plants to do good. Then you've got things like watering cycles, how much sun those plants use, and so many other factors. So you really need to practice what you do. You can't just assume one day you'll figure it out. Because if you have no food and that's what you were relying on for food, you may quickly realize that you're screwed. Now, the fourth thing on my list is shelter. While some people list shelter as their second thing on their list, I keep it at the fourth spot for a reason. And that's mainly because most of us have somewhere that they live day to day. Whether it's a home you own or a friend's house that you stay out, we pretty much all have somewhere to go. And if not, then you might actually want to bump this up to your first priority, because if you have nowhere to go, you have nowhere to store any of your preps. There's a lot of questions about bugging in or bugging out, and honestly, it really depends on your situation. If you live somewhere that could require your immediate evacuation, such as a fire or a hurricane-prone area, or maybe you live close to a nuclear reactor, then you might want to have things organized in a way that lets you grab them and throw them into the vehicle and quickly leave. Now, this is usually kind of a short-lived sort of thing. I mean, fires don't last forever, hurricanes don't last forever, and nuclear explosions might last forever, but for the most part, these are things that it's not really bugging out, it's just more of grabbing supplies and going. The term that people use bugging out for is more like when you take everything and run out into the forest, but honestly, that kind of is the next part of this topic. Shelter is important because if you do have to leave quickly, you might only have your car, and let's say your car breaks down. What do you have then? Part of my emergency disaster bug out supplies include a tent. While it's not practical for most scenarios, if you had to stay somewhere for a short period of time, it'd be so much more comfortable to do it in a little area where you'd have some privacy. Now, if your plan really is to bug out and not just evacuate for disasters, then you really do need somewhere to go. Many people think that, okay, well, I've just got this backpack with all these camping basics and I've got a tent, so when things go wrong, I'm just gonna run out into the forest. While it sounds like a fun idea to some people, it's really not practical. There's many reasons why it's not practical, but you need more supplies than you'd be able to carry, and even if you set up a camp somewhere, you'd have no way to secure it, and you'd have no guarantee that you'd be able to forage enough food to live on. which kind of leads many people to this ultimate dream of owning land, building a private protected compound, and living off that land. And while this isn't really impossible by any means, it is highly impractical unless you really have a lot of money. Unfortunately, we do live in a world where you have to pay taxes even if you're fully off-grid, and in fact, many townships won't even let you have completely off-grid homes. They'll require some sort of electricity or water to be hooked up, even if you have everything solar and well-based. And even if you did live off the grid, you'd still have to pay taxes on that land, which means you'd still need money for taxes, basic supplies that you can't grow yourself, and other miscellaneous items. Most of us really won't have the luxury to bug out, or honestly, ever have the need. But we also may not have to evacuate. This means that if something did happen, then your most likely scenario would be to bug in at your house, which, if you ask me, is probably the best case scenario because this is where you live, this is where all of your preps should be. You don't have to worry about moving large amounts of water, food, ammunition, other preps, and you know what is and is not normal in your area. No matter if you choose to bug in or bug out, you're going to need to remember the basics of life. If you live in a cold area, you're going to need to make sure you have a way to create fire or some source of heat to stay alive. Likewise, in a hot climate, you're going to need some type of shelter to shelter you from the sun and the heat, or you could develop heat stroke or other heat-related issues. Either way, only you know what your situation is going to be, so you need to think of those things when you're going to bug in or bug out. You need to keep yourself protected, which kind of leads to our next topic of protection. Now, let me start off by saying the first thing you should know when it comes to protection is to shut your mouth. Now, I'm not trying to be rude, but there are so many people out there that talk about everything they have. They brag about their food, they brag about their water, they brag about their guns, and ways that they're gonna protect their families, and ways that they're gonna gather resources, and all of that is a very bad idea for anyone else to know. Sure, it's not a big deal right now because things are good, but you never know what tomorrow could bring. One of your neighbors who always overhears you talking about your 10-year supply of food might come to you if there is an emergency and ask for food. If you give it to them, then they're gonna keep coming back because they know you've got more. And if you don't give it to them and push them away, they might go and tell some others that you've got a ton of food stored up at your place. And sure, while you have some guns and weapons to protect yourself, let's say they just get angry and don't want you there anymore. You're not sharing with them, so they're angry at you and throw a Molotov cocktail on your house, which ignites the whole thing and burns it to the ground. Now, all of your preps are destroyed and you have absolutely nothing. Operation security is the most important thing when it comes to this. All right, let's get rid of that buzzkill out of the room. Let's focus on some of the more fun parts he came here, actually talking about weapons. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time here because no matter what I say, there's always somebody in the comments who knows better. For example, if I said you should get a .380 caliber pistol because it's small and compact, someone's going to say, oh, well, you shouldn't do that. You should definitely get a 9mm. It's way more effective. And then someone's going to reply to them and say, oh, a 9mm? No, you need to go to a 40. That's way better. And then someone will respond to them and say, no way, a 45 is the best out of everything. And it's just going to be this endless chain of going back and forth. And honestly, it doesn't matter. All I'm going to say on that topic is choose something that you like, that you're capable of firing safely, and it's going to be good enough. Why? Because all guns perform the same basic functions. They fire projectiles that can injure and kill people. Even if it's as small as a .22 caliber, it is still deadly. And while many people would love to disagree on that topic, a gun is a gun. I am going to create another video on this topic because there is so much to be said about guns, ammunition, parts, cleaning, maintenance, and how many rounds of ammo you should have. There's so many things to talk about there, so I will be having another video on that soon. Now, let's say you're not allowed to own a gun. Maybe you're not old enough, maybe you've been convicted of a felony, but what other options are there? There's plenty. There's knives, clubs, bats, axes, machetes, swords, pellet guns, electronic stun guns, black powder guns, and so on. I mean, there's tons of weapons. While not all of them may be practical, having a bow and arrow could potentially get you food, or it might even save your life. And there's also lethal and non-lethal options as well. If you want to just get pepper spray, bear spray, stun guns, things like that. You just have to look up what's legal in your area and legal for you to have. No matter what weapon you choose to arm yourself with, you still do need to practice with it, whether it's a gun, a sword, or pepper spray. You need to know how to use it. If you spray pepper spray into the wind and it blows back in your eyes, you've just done more damage to yourself than you could ever imagine. If you don't know that your pistol has a safety on it, and you accidentally click it on, you might not have any clue why the hell your gun's trigger won't pull. Practice makes perfect. And the more you practice, the better you're going to get with anything. And in a life or death scenario, that could make all the difference between living or dying. Now, the last thing on my list which is again some people's most important things. I kind of keep it last because it kind of goes hand in hand with everything else, and that's money. It's one of the things that I kind of touch on in the end because everything that we mentioned above costs money to do. And honestly, money is probably one of the most valuable prep items that you can ever have. Now, before you run out and spend all your money on guns, food, water, ammunition, and other preps, you should make sure that you have at least 3 months of finances saved up and work towards getting to 6 to 12 months. Now, by this, I mean actually figuring out how much money you need to spend every month on rent, food, water, gas, electric, car repairs, medication, all the things that you normally go through in a month. Add all that stuff up and add in a little bit of extra cash because there's always going to be miscellaneous things that you're going to need to pick up. Now, take that, and that is what you need at minimum to maintain the way you live today. 3 months isn't a lot of time. Let's say you lose your job today, you're going to have to start interviewing, and unless companies move really quickly, there's going to be at least a few weeks or a couple months in between jobs. Now that's in good times. Now imagine something like COVID happens again, where you lose your job in a facility that isn't required to be open. Well, you're in the same boat as a lot of other people, so you might not be able to run out and find another replacement job. It might take you 6 months or a year to find something that you can get back into, which is why it's so important to have that much finance saved up. You can have all the preps in the world, but if you lose your job and don't have money saved up, you risk losing your house, which is where all your preps are stored, and then you risk losing your preps, damaging everything else, and honestly, you've spent all this time getting prepared for nothing. While it can be said that in a true end of the world as we know it scenario, cash, gold, silver, and other items of perceived value like diamonds and gemstones will probably be worthless. They won't be able to buy you food to eat. But in any other scenario where things are functioning properly, like in a normal society, having that extra cash will be able to keep your head above water and avoid losing all your stuff. Now onto the finale, the thing that everyone's kind of been waiting for, the how much do we need? There's a saying that I have that goes, it never hurts to have one more. And by that, I mean, if you're at a store and you say, well, do I need any more ammo? Sure, you could do with one more. Do I need any more water? Sure, I could do with another case. Do I need any more canned food? Yeah, sure, I could go with a couple more cans of food. It never hurts to have one more, and honestly, if you do it like that, then you're going to be able to stock up with more stuff over time. You really have to sit down and ask yourself, how much do I need? Am I preparing for a winter storm that could knock my power out for a couple weeks and I won't be able to get to the store? Is there a possibility that a hurricane's going to come through and we're going to lose power and other utilities and we have to survive for a couple days or a week or maybe a couple weeks, possibly even a month in some areas? But I can't answer that question for you. You have to tell me where you live, like what scenarios you're prepping for and how much time you think it would take to restore things back to normal in normal conditions. Many people see prepping as this giant project where you have to have thousands of rounds of ammunition and years worth of food, but honestly, prepping is more simple. It's about taking the basics that you need and stocking up on those for the most likely scenario. Sure, there could be a sunspot that flares out and burns up all the electronics that completely screws up the country, but you're a lot more likely to have lightning strike a transformer in your neighborhood, shutting off your power for a few days. So that means prepare yourself for a few days without food and water. And then once you get to that few days, use my rule of could always use another one, add another day. Once you get to a week, you know what? Why don't we get another week? And then after a few of those, you get to a month. You know what? Why not another month? But that's how you can build it up over time. You don't need to rush out and do it all at once. You start with the stuff that you know is most likely going to happen and you prepare for that. And then from there, you can keep expanding until you run out of space or until you decide, hey, I'm going to find a way to have more space. Because that's what it's going to come down to. Things like water and food take up a lot of space. And unfortunately, most of us don't have giant warehouses where we can store all of our stuff in case of an emergency. Now, when it comes to storing food, water, guns, ammo, there are a few basic calculations. For water, it's just roughly a gallon per day per person is what they recommend for just drinking. I would be willing to say that you need at least that much, if not double, just to live comfortably. So that's saying 2 to 3 gallons per person per day. While you don't need to shower every day, having enough water on hand to shower in case you fall in the mud or something happens would be huge for your morale and just to stay clean. The other reason you want to stay clean is because the cleaner you are, the less likely you are for little cuts and nicks to turn into big infections. So that is another reason why it's nice to have that extra water on hand so you don't have to worry about that. However, water is hard to store and and it's very heavy, takes up a lot of space, and it is hard to rotate properly. You also have to kind of think about things like bleach or other additives that can help keep it stable in a container for a long time. Even commercially bottled water can go bad over time if it's not properly stored. And again, this could be an entire video, so I might put something out on that. For food, there's also calculations, but a lot of it's based on calories per person, with the average diet ranging anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 calories per day. But you have to remember that calories are only part of that equation. There are backpacking bars that can provide 10,000 calories, but it's mostly carbohydrates and other ingredients that are just pure sugar. If you were to try to live on those bars alone, you'd quickly run into many major health complications and could even die from it. You need to balance your diet. So that means stocking up on things that aren't just high in carbs and calories, but also high in other nutritions and nutrients. So when you're looking at things in your grocery store, look at different types of foods, canned goods, and things that you wouldn't normally pick up and give them a try. The more varied your diet is, the more likely you're going to get through a scenario without having as many issues. You could still pick up multivitamins that give you all the minerals and stuff that you need, but I can't really speak for how long those things store. Maybe they store indefinitely just like food, but I'm pretty sure that stuff starts to break down pretty quickly, just like foods do. And again, this is going to vary from person to person. It's going to depend on you, your weight, your food preferences. And again, it varies from person to person based on body type, food preferences, digestive issues, and so many more things that there is just no one-size-fits-all solution. When it comes to weapon and ammunition, it's a topic that, again, I'll probably make a whole video on because there's so much in there that's up for debate. Some people recommend having a couple hundred rounds of many different calibers as well as different guns to fire them all, while others say to have very few variations in your calibers and have multiple guns of the same type so that you can swap parts if you need it. Either way, the choice is going to be yours to make. I can't answer that for you, and honestly, I will make a video diving more into the pros and cons of each of those, but for now, just know that the decision is yours. The biggest thing that you want to note here is that no matter what you choose, make sure you practice. You need to know how to clear jam, resolve feeding issues, how to maintain and handle your firearms, how to clean them properly, and just use them in general. The amount of ammo should always include enough to go to the range and stay proficient. So when you're asking how much ammo you need, always have more that you can feel free to use without worrying about it. When it comes to currency, that's a whole different topic as well. There's so many different types of currency. You've got cash, coins, gems, and so many other things that you can hold perceived value in. But again, perceived value doesn't always mean value. So work towards saving up 12 months of cash. But start with 1 month and then get to 2 months. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. Save as much as you can and don't touch it. Pretend like it doesn't exist. It's not a rainy day fund or something like that. This is something that you're going to need to hang on to for such an event. If you ever lose your job or you can't work for an extended period, at least you know you're covered for that much time. And honestly, if you had 12 months of cash saved up, you might find out that you can use a lot of your preps in the meantime to make that stretch to 15 months or 18 months or possibly even longer. The last thing I want to talk about is dedicating time to yourself. And primarily, I mean learning. Knowledge is power. Learn about different things in your area, different survival tactics, read books, learn about things that you can get involved with. Learn about first aid. You never know when you're going to have to use something that could save someone else's life. Train with your firearms, rotate your preps, and never stop trying to grow your knowledge. The more you know, the more likely you'll be to handle different situations and increase your odds of survival. Just like learning takes care of your brain, getting proper exercise will take care of your body, which will support you in the long run. Getting and staying in shape is probably one of the biggest things that you can do, so I would highly recommend getting started today. You can have all the preps in the world, but if you're too tired to push on, none of it will do you any good. So, to recap, I know I didn't dive too much into detail about specifics, but that's because this was just an overview video on prepping. The entire point here was to show you the basics of the things that you need and to get you to start asking questions such as, what disasters are probably going to happen in my area? What do I need to get through them? And then from there, you can start building your preps from the ground up, stocking up on the things you need, and then as you learn, you'll learn more things to get, and you can grow your stockpile. But that way, it takes something that seems like a giant monster and brings it down to proper size. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Stay alert, stay prepared, and stay ahead of the curve.